Thank you, Peter. This is a script for remotely conducted open meetings. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or acts inappropriately. Confirming member access. As a preliminary matter, this is the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board. I am the chairman, Andy Lowell. Please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members of the board, when I call your name, please respond in affirmative. Mr. Brace, Peter Brace.
Aye.
Mr. Dave Franzuto.
Aye.
Ginger Andrews.
It's actually Virginia F. Andrews. Yes, I am present.
All right, thank you, Ginger. Tom Sadlowski.
Here.
Dan Pronk. Is Dan on board, Peter?
No.
All right. Dave Bossy.
Present.
Thank you. Anticipated speakers tonight. I saw Tara Riley.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. McKenna here, Steve McKenna.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hosier, Kona.
I'm here.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Introduction to the remote meeting. Good evening. This open meeting of the Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. For Zoom meetings, please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials have been provided. Members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. We will shortly be turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Call to order this meeting of the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, Tuesday, October 19th, 2021, just a bit after 5 p.m. Do we have approval of tonight's agenda, please?
So moved, Mr. Chairman. This is Ginger.
Is there a second?
Second, Tom.
Motion's been made by Ginger Andrews, seconded by Tom Sadlowski. All in favor for approval of the agenda? Peter Brace.
Aye.
Dave Franzuto. Dave, got your ears on? Dave Bossy.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Is Mr. Franzuto with us?
He is.
He's
just not-
muted.
He's muted.
All right.
He's nodding his head.
Okay. I didn't see any minutes. Next meeting on that, Mr. Brace, or did you send out some minutes?
I did.
All right. I'm sorry, I did not see them. We have minutes from which week was that, Mr. Brace?
October 5th.
Board members, any adjustments, changes to be made to the October 5th minutes if you've reviewed them?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ginger.
Ginger, please.
I read the minutes and they looked fine to me.
Okay, good, thank you. If there's nothing to be revised, I'll accept the motion for approval of the minutes of October 5th, 2021.
So moved.
I'll take that as a motion from Mr. Sidlowski, second from Mr. Bossy. All in favor, Mr. Brace,
Aye.
Mr. Franzuto,
Dave, unmute yourself.
Ms. Andrews,
Aye.
Chair, I did not read the minutes. I will abstain. I believe we have a quorum of approval for the minutes of October 5th. I see Mr. Pronk has entered. Dan, are you there?
I am, yes.
Thank you. Under Chairman's report, outcome of the select board vote on liveaboard regulations. Just a quick summary from the vice chair, Mr. Sadowski, if you would, please.
Yeah, on the 6th, the select board met to discuss all the modifications to the harbor and waterways provisions of the town regulations. Regarding the liveaboards, they put in precisely what they had in the past, which I think was way back in July or June. But let me read that quickly for the record. There are 5 provisions under liveaboards. First, there shall be no liveaboards at any town pier or wharf. Liveaboards shall only be allowed within the Nantucket boat basin or in the waterways if the vessel is tied to a mooring that is authorized by the town pursuant to regulations. Vessels used as liveaboards that are anchored are prohibited. Number 2, no vessel shall be moored in Nantucket waterways and used as liveaboard for a period exceeding 48 hours unless the owner of the vessel is present during the period of time, or there is a person who is licensed as a U.S. Coast Guard captain with a minimum rating as an operator of uninspected passenger vessels on board. 3, vessels used as a liveaboard shall be required to complete a registration form listing information as required by the harbor master to include at a minimum the vessel owner's name, address, vessel type, and identifying information of persons using the vessel as a liveaboard. 4, vessels used as a liveaboard shall have a current boater's insurance policy. 5, vessels used as a liveaboard shall be capable of traveling under its own motorized propulsion to a sewer pump out station located at a town pier or Nantucket boat basin. I'd like to make a comment that we did not get any recognition by the harbor master when this came up, that these regulations actually came about as initiated by our committee. I would also like to point out that the dinghy regulations we've discussed in the past have been approved, and the slip lottery did not get changed, with the exception of a provision that there will only be one entry in the 2 recreational lotteries per boat, per Massachusetts licensed boat. And I do believe, I didn't pay as close attention, but I do believe the commercial lottery will become permanent, but the recreational slips will not be permanent. I sent a notice out to the members of this committee after the meeting. That was what I was trying to explain. So now it's all finished. It's been approved, and our liveaboard regulations, not exactly what we said, but pretty much covers the things that we brought to their attention.
Good job, man. That's great.
Tom, thank you so much for your diligence in following along through this from one end to the other. Truly appreciate that. Any comments from the board?
I'd like to say nice job, and it sounds pretty much we got all the bases covered.
Until something else comes up and until the next time some regulation changes are being made, we'll just keep our ears open on what can be most effective and best for the harbor. Marine Department report. Has Sheila made it tonight?
No,
Anybody from the Marine Department?
no.
Okay, Natural Resources report. Hi, Tara.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So since we last talked, we have not secured a date yet for the pond openings, but they will occur before the end of October. So we'll send out some emails and probably a social media blast to let everyone know as soon as we know more information about when that's going to occur. So last week we had a busy week with field work. We're kind of wrapping up our season and bringing in a lot of our gear. So we brought in our spawning cages that we put out every season with scallops in them. Today we sunk our oyster cages that are located in Pulpus Harbor for the winter. And we did a seine survey in Shimo Bend that measures the biodiversity of the oyster reef that Leah Cabral has been doing research on for the past 3 years. And also we collected eelgrass from the shore on Brant Point that had viable roots, and we bundled those up and worked with the Nantucket Land Council to plant those over on Hussey Shoal. I think that was last Friday. So we were able to kind of fill in some of the holes from previous plantings from the previous years. So that was pretty exciting to see underwater, see, how well everything is doing. We are continuing our recreational shellfish wardening. Our staff has been out in Mattakit, kind of just checking on what's coming in, how people are doing, especially in that closed area that I talked to you about last time we met. And things seem to be going pretty well. The last thing that we're trying to wrap up is we completed our dive surveys for our larval release studies that we do with bay scallops. And we found some seed populations in Mattakit Harbor that we need to go back as soon as the wind calms down a little bit, probably Thursday, and kind of evaluate and see the extent of the seed situation out there. What we found so far is in the middle of Mattakit, so it's not at risk for stranding. So we're pretty happy about that. And then the following week, we'll probably get back in Nantucket Harbor and do a little more scouting for some of that seed that we usually see up in the head of the harbor strand this time of year, and just make sure that we didn't miss anything. And I think that's all I have for this week. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Tara, thank you. Board members, questions for Tara? Tara, I got a call from Brian Bouchard a little earlier today asking our opinion on the Lingbia. Seems some people are reporting to him, and I guess he was out doing some push raking himself and encountered some. You reported on it at the last meeting, pretty much kind of, the same theory onto its existence. He was under the impression it's been around a long time. I guess my question is, what's a long time? I don't ever remember hearing about it in the 70s and 80s. Of course, we have an incredible amount more of stormwater runoff today than we did back then, and as well as septic system impact and nitrogen loading, possibly from fertilizing. Is there anything we can share with people who are asking questions about it. I mean, is there an approach being worked on? Is it still being studied? Any type of action in any way that can help with this that's coming from your end of the office or from natural resources in particular?
Yeah, definitely. I've heard a lot from recreational scalpers about, how they're noticing it a lot more this year, especially out in Mattakit, which is a place that we haven't seen it previously. So that's very concerning. The earliest documentation that I could find on it from a survey was back in 2006 from Peter Boyce. So, I think a lot is going to come out from these long-term benthic surveys that we've been doing every year. And the one that we performed not too long ago, and I think it was September 20th. Yeah, the last 2 weeks of September that we did. We're going to work up that data and compare it to what we've seen over, the past 15, 16 years. And we can just kind of see how it's expanded and kind of spread around the island. And I think that will kind of open a lot of people's eyes because it is something very visual. And it's something that affects people when they're doing something that they love, like recreational scalloping. It definitely gums up the push rakes and the nets, and it's pretty gross. So it takes people seeing it and noticing it to want to make a change or figure out how we can make things better. So, I think if we just hold on for a couple months and we kind of get an idea from the study, how things have changed, I think that we can probably, make some noise about it and kind of see what we can do.
Thank you, Tara. Board members, questions, comments for Tara, Natural Resources Report?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ginger.
Yes, Ginger, please.
I would be interested to know if other communities have had the problem and what can be done about it with the lingba.
Me too.
Oh, okay. So basically for now, we're monitoring and documenting the spread. And we don't yet know what the solution is.
We're looking into what things are specifically making that type of species of algae kind of become more abundant than other invasive species that we might have. Personally, I think that over the past 3 years, it's increased substantially. But we need that information from the surveys and those metrics measured so that we can kind of figure out what we're going to do about it, because obviously some things have changed drastically. And I don't know about other communities with this. It's something that, I need to look into. I think Thais is probably someone that would probably know off the top of her head, since she's working with harmful algae and that sort of thing. So I wish she was here to answer your question, Ginger, but I will find out and see what we can do.
Great,
All right.
thanks.
Thank you, Ginger. Tara, is there any thought in connection with, just by you mentioning the timeline of it, the issue increasing over the past few years, I've noticed a lot of increased activity with cormorants. And just curious if, some of the natural causes are being, looked into as well. I believe, bird activity is going to be a natural cause, but there have been, at least from what we've heard, some effective ways of scaring birds away or any other type of means to try to keep them from roosting at the harbor's edge. I know if you happen to encounter an area where these birds roost in the evening, it can become quite ripe to the senses. And so it only makes you wonder, how far is that going when the tide comes up and the waves take that excrement into the harbor with it. I haven't noticed any roosting on harbor shorelines. I've noticed it in the Cod of the Bay, but I'm sure there's areas in the harbor also where they may be roosting.
I think it's going to be a hot topic, especially this winter. I mean, firsthand, we're seeing it with the oyster growers, because they're going to have to control the bird situation up there in order to maintain the water quality and compliance with the FDA. But I have had a lot of people say that, when they're coming back from the head of the harbor, heading into town, that on every point on Code 2, they're seeing more and more cormorants hanging out. And I know that Thais is doing some studies on fecal coliforms in our closed areas. So the one area that's closed in Mattakit, that's Hither Creek to Warren's Landing, is closed because of high fecal coliforms, and those came back traced to birds. And the same thing happened in the oyster reef in Shimo Creek. So, all of a sudden, we got to think about how you can control wildlife in some of these areas, and what's going to be an acceptable measure to do that. I don't think you're going to want propane cannons going off every 10 minutes on the water's edge, but yeah, I think it's going to be like a huge issue moving forward for sure.
Well, I'm glad to hear it's on your radar, Tara. Mr. Brace?
Yeah, Tara, I was just wondering if, I know we talked about when you were first telling us that last year that DMF was being a whole lot more strict, and there was a sort of a regime change, and you were telling us that no more oysters being put into Shimo Creek, and that you were thinking that one cause of that, because of whatever the water quality test said, one cause of that was likely people who were coming to the island to stay here during the lockdown to get away during COVID, and those people stayed. And I'm wondering if in Mattakit, there are people in the houses that aren't usually there at certain times of the year, which means more stuff leaching into the harbor. I'm wondering if you think that that's maybe part of it.
I do think that people are staying here longer, and it's an increase on the septic loads in areas where maybe it would be more seasonal. But that's part of what Thais is doing. And I know early November, she's going up to New Hampshire to discuss the results, because I think they keyed out the difference between human waste and bird waste for 2 of the areas, and they came up predominantly bird waste. So I find that interesting. And maybe it's always been bird waste. We just haven't taken it that step further to actually figure it out. But here we are, and we need to try and figure out what we're going to do. I don't know if dealing with birds is easier than dealing with sewage and septic, but I guess we'll find out.
Oh, great news. That's interesting stuff, Tara. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Pronk?
those cormorants, they're just not good for the harbor or anything else. You sit down the harbor at any time and you watch one of those things dive down, and every single time that thing comes up, it's got a baby flounder in its mouth, or it's got some kind of baby fish. You watch them, they'll go down every time, 15, 18 times. Not only are they wrecking the harbor with their feces, can you imagine what they eat every day out of the harbor? It's mind blowing. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Dan. Well, we know you're out there and you got your eyes open, so thanks. Other board members? We'll move any public comment on natural resources or marine department. Not seeing or hearing any. We'll move forward to old business. This is something that's been on our agenda for probably better than a year now. Excessive sand and scallops, dredging plan. Tonight we have with us Mr. Steve McKenna from the Cape and Islands, Director for Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management. Thank you, Steve, for being here. I'll start with explaining to Steve and just trying to summarize what we've been talking about on this subject. It seems as though over the past 25 years, maybe 30 years, really since the no-name storm of 1991, we've had a large amount of coastal erosion inside the harbor. It doesn't matter what shoreline you look at, whether it's Washington Street right downtown, or wrap yourself all the way around the interior of our harbor from Monomoy, Pocomo, Wauwinet, and every shoreline of Co2 has eroded, some areas losing up to 50 to 75 feet of shoreline. In the past, we've had some meetings discussing the eelgrass restoration project, which is being at the time, well, it's spearheaded by the Land Council. At the time, the director was Cormac Collier. He and our Natural Resources Director, Mr. Carlson, were both in attendance at a meeting together, which was very handy. And some of the news that came from that has just simply inspired me to keep this on our agenda. Hearing that, first of all, the granular sand that's washing off of our beaches cannot support the root system of eelgrass. And then hearing at that same meeting that some mooring handlers are reporting that where they used to set a mooring in, let's say, 6 feet of water, now they're setting in the same place and they're in roughly 4 feet of water. And if we have somewhere of a layer of up to 24 inches in places of granular sand off of our shorelines, are they smothering? Is that sand smothering eelgrass beds? Will we ever see eelgrass be able to come back in those areas? I had the opportunity to dive with a commercial scalloper who dives, Tim Mooney, and we were off of Folgers Marsh and noticed vast areas of sand where the scallops have actually developed a method of creating a little hollow in the sand to kind of hide out in. Really not much eelgrass to support them whatsoever in the area we were in. And I've noticed it along the shorelines of Co2 as well. And so, you know, it's been my curiosity to whether some type of dredging for the improvement of our shellfish beds is a possibility. I've read an article in the Vineyard Gazette about the Great Edgartown Pond being dredged for quite a few years, hydraulically dredged. The operator of the dredge reported that when he first started, he put his hand underwater about elbow deep and couldn't see his hand. The water was so murky. And after several years of dredging, he dropped his sledgehammer overboard and said he could see it on the bottom in 12 feet of water. And this to me sounded exciting to me. And we haven't had any dredging projects here for quite some time. I know the Director of Natural Resources is working on a dredging plan, probably more related to navigation, but and maybe also some tidal flow. But I'm not sure if there's any actual description of this being done in a way that improves our shellfish beds. So thankfully, Mr. Franzuto is able to get Mr. McKenna to join us tonight. And I'm hoping some questions can be answered and some data can be shared that can put us in a direction of what type of action can we take. My thoughts were to try to do this in as much of a low impact way as possible. until I shared this thought with the board, did it really kind of sink in with several of the board members. I don't want to just see some big old dredge brought in and suck up the sand and bring it out into the Cod of the Bay or out in front of Dionis and dump it. I feel the sand belongs back up on shore someplace. I'm wondering if this type of a project could be coupled with a coastal resiliency project, and maybe kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. And if this is so, my comparison was in working with a contractor whom actually dives with a hydraulic rig and can see what he's removing from the bottom, and possibly see when he gets to the silty, muddy base that will support eelgrass, know enough to stop and move on, and simply be removing this granular sand from our harbor bottom. Mr. McKenna, can you enlighten us, please?
That's a lot to unpack right there.
Yeah.
So, short answer is, in terms of dredging to remove coarse sediment for habitat improvement, if you will, I've not seen a project like that. I'm not aware of one. Certainly not in my region. I cover the Cape and the islands, but I've made some calls to our dredge coordinator. I was asking him,
No.
is there much of this happening in other parts of the state? And the answer is no. Most of the navigation dredge projects are around the Cape and the islands, and they're pretty limited down here as well. Just some initial thoughts listening to you. I don't know. I think there'd have to be a lot of assessment and a lot of questions as to how you would do that, and bring it down to what depth. What's the goal of it? You'd have to really kind of characterize it if you were to do that. The other thought, tying it into resilience, good news is if it's a hydraulic dredge project in the state of Massachusetts, you pretty much have to put that material on a beach. You can't just take it off and dump it unless you're the Army Corps of Engineers. And so it would go to the beach if you were to permit a project like that. And it makes sense. Sand's a valuable resource. So finding an area would absolutely make sense. Most of the projects that down here, they're for ecological restoration, if you will, are generally for the purpose of water quality. That one you mentioned in Edgartown Pond, that's to improve tidal flush and tidal exchange. So there are some of those that have been permitted as well. They're usually around an inlet, but sometimes they'll allow dredging up into an estuary to improve the hydraulics in there. The ones that I've been involved with, almost all of them have been combined with a navigation piece of it, which makes the permitting much, much simpler. Just coming in to say, I want to dredge for water quality. And I've seen some proposed. Neither of those have been on a larger scale. Neither of those have been successful to date. I've seen a number of those at a smaller scale. Those have been approved, but those are generally in small little almost rivers, and they combine water quality with usually clearing material for an anadromous fish run. So these are, some of these are, a 10-foot wide creek, and they're going in with an excavator and clearing out material, that kind of thing. So I think that's on a different scale that you might be thinking about out here. And then just sort of dredging 101, obviously Dave and maybe some of you others know about it, but even in a typical navigation project, there's an awful lot of permitting involved. You've got at a minimum, you've got MEPA, which is a state certificate. You've got then 2 other state licenses, a Chapter 91 and a 401 water quality permit. And then you jump to the federal level and you've got an Army Corps permit, which is required. Then you jump to us, CZM, which is federal consistency. And then you bounce back to the local, which is a local order of conditions. So that's about 6 steps right there on a regular, straightforward navigation project. When you get into something which is really brand new, in my experience, what you're describing right now, it's going to be that much more challenging. There's going to have to be a whole lot more, I think, assessment of the area, the resources that currently exist. I'm not a eelgrass expert, so you'd have to really help permittees, agencies understand the dynamics, what's happening to the eelgrass, and how this dredging is going to essentially solve the problem. You know, one thought that comes to mind when I was listening to you is Chatham. You know, they have seen a tremendous amount of resources, both shellfish resources, mussel beds, soft shells, but also eelgrass beds get smothered under sand as that barrier beach moves, and big shoals will move around. Typically, what happens is a lot of those areas, they just change. And so if it was a low energy area tight behind the beach with a lot of soft shell, and all of a sudden that flow increases, the more coarse sand pushes through there, a lot of times that'll transition to, you know, hard shell to coag and more things like that. The eelgrass, once it's initially buried, my experience has been, if the water quality conditions are right and there's local seed sources nearby, generally that recovers over time once that filling has kind of equilibrated and that becomes stable. But again, these are all questions for eelgrass folks, shellfish folks. That's not my thing, but those would be some of the questions I think that would be, you know, asked of you folks to kind of really, you know, describe the dynamics, help everyone understand how that project is going to solve the problem. So yeah, I mean, that's just some initial thoughts that I'm, you know, off the top of my head. Yeah,
All right.
Dave. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Franzuto, go ahead.
Yes, Steve, what about that project that you and I looked at? I think it was in Falmouth. What was the parameters for that?
So Bourne Pond, that was an existing narrow cut through a barrier beach in Sandwich with a bridge going over it. And the town, DPW had maintained that for years, but it was a constriction up into Bourne's Pond.
Oh.
And so the town permitted the widening of that. And it was essentially for water quality purposes, but they used navigation in conjunction with that. So it was first and foremost a navigation improvement project, but the whole rationale for it locally was to improve flushing of Bourne's Pond for TMDL reasons and for tidal flushing. So yeah, I talked to Greg Frazier about that, and while it was pushed locally as water quality, regulatory wise, they have the navigation piece in it. And as you know, there's about 5 feet of air draft underneath that bridge, but he said, oh no, for kayaks and everything else. So they could still use that piece of it. Like I said, the other successful ones that I've seen, they're just much smaller scale. They're kind of creeks, cleaning those out. There's two, one that's just starting permitting process right now in Chilmark Pond. And I've worked with it's a private association putting forward the project, but the town was involved initially. We provided some input. I coordinated an interagency meeting to just float the idea. And they want to essentially dig out the inlet more and also cut shoals that go across the pond there to improve tidal flushing in that. And they got a lot of feedback from the agencies, and basically they needed to do hydraulic modeling. They had to do sediment dynamic analysis. They had to do a complete habitat assessment. And their challenges is a lot of habitat. There's eelgrass resources, shellfish resources. It's mapped as essential fish habitat. So they've got a long ways to go. And oddly, they're starting the process. They just filed a notice of intent locally. And usually that's the last step in the process, because normally projects comes forward with the state agencies and then the Corps, it'll get tweaked around a little bit through that process. And you take the sort of the final design locally. Why they're starting the other way, I'm not sure. And then another one was on Tisbury Great Pond. They want to do essentially the same thing, some internal dredging to improve tidal flushing there. We had DMF and National Marine Fisheries out one day on the pond, and it was the same thing. They kept telling them about the amount of assessment, basically the same feedback that the folks at Chilmar Pond heard, and they walked away from it. It was a group of property owners. They decided it was going to be too much investment of money, process time to do it. So that one is not moving forward to the best of my knowledge right now.
Steve, Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask.
Go ahead, Dave.
What do you and I talked about this a while back, and you felt that it would be favorable for some type of a pilot program. If we could get people like, you know, Fred Short and all the eelgrass gurus, you know, in the Northeast on board with this, along with the Land Council, who is doing eelgrass restoration for us and has been for several years. Do you think that we could do some type of a pilot project to try this, and you know, just for the specific of trying to grow some eelgrass? If we got all those, and Tara and her group are in touch with those guys, you know, monthly for different reasons, and if we could get them involved, do you think we could generate some support for that?
I do. And you know, if I were approaching it, again, listening to it for the first time, I think it would have better chance of moving forward that way than going through sort of the, you know, typical dredge box permitting, you know, hole. And yeah, you've got great resources out on the island, the research center out there, just a bunch of good partners. You could present it as a pilot and also maybe or as an ecological restoration project. And that you'd have to get some feedback from the agencies, how they'd like to see it sort of proposed. But, you know, I think the best way to do it was when you're ready, we could convene, we call them an agency pre-application meeting. Basically, you get all the agencies together, you float the concept, what you're thinking. It's not final design by any stretch. And you'll get pretty honest feedback at that point, what's required. And you can say, you know, how do we do this? Is it a pilot? Is it ecological restoration? You know, that kind of discussion.
Yeah, I think, Tara, I think we could get enough folks together in the room. I mean, we did that one time with a project up in the head of the harbor where we dredged the three spits going by and Pacoma, and that was for flow. And yeah, I will readily admit it did have a navigation component too, but it was for flow, and the project was a success. But we made a mistake in limiting it. Steve, I don't know if you remember that project, but we limited it to under 10,000 cubic yards. And we made a mistake. I mean, we did the modeling and everything, we got it permitted. We should have taken 30,000 cubic yards out of it. So, but Tara, do you think that through you, Mr. Chairman, Tara, do you think that you could get your folks together and we could get this meeting going with that Steve could set up?
Yeah, definitely. I think if we meet with our local stakeholders first, I know that we have a meeting with the Land Council and the Conservation Foundation on Thursday afternoon, and I can kind of brief them on what we discussed here and what Steve had mentioned, and just kind of start the process with that, just kind of kicking some ideas around, because that's kind of what we're doing, is we're trying to all get on the same page for eelgrass restoration and kind of pooling our projects and our resources together. And I think we probably could come up with a pretty awesome pilot project, and then, you know, start kind of putting all the pieces together and then arrange a pre-application meeting and kind of talk to everybody and see exactly what they might be looking for.
Good.
You know,
Thank-
I was gonna say, the benefit of that approach in some ways, my experience, that opens up a lot more funding opportunities when it's sort of a science-based sort of pilot, almost like a research project. You've got more funding sources than our sort of standard dredge funding sources.
Well, Tara, that sounds, I mean, we really need, you know, your efforts on board for this to come together, especially, you know, labeling it as a pilot project. You know, what area would you find suited to give this a test in? I mean, you're familiar with setting spat bags and whatnot and everything else that you do in the harbor. I'm more kind of located to a certain area that I have interest in, but it has nothing to do, the dredging has nothing to do with that. It's just what I see from out front of where I frequent is some little islands appearing within bends of the harbor that during low moon tide events, I just never saw this before. And it's like, wow, I didn't know there was an island here. And of course, it's only during a major low tide event, but you can see how much shallower areas are. And I would personally base this more on where's the most sand, where does this not cause any negative effect to any existing sea life. So you know, we would really rely on you on the best area to give this a shot.
Well,
Dave?
well, and also with their knowledge of where the areas are, a couple of things, where the areas are that we've, you know, readily agree that we've lost eelgrass, number one, and number two, where it would survive the best based on water quality. You don't want to put a bunch of, you know, you don't want to move the sand around, plant a bunch of eelgrass and the water quality come in and kill it all. So, you know, I think that, and it may not, and in my opinion, I think you're looking at maybe 100 square feet, 100 square yards, and maybe a couple locations, one in the bends, one over by Shimo. I don't know, but that's Tara's world. But you know, I think if you have some flexibility and if you have some choices of locations, things get, I think things get permitted easier than if you say, it's not like navigation where the channel's got to be right here. You know, this is something that you want to maybe try in two different locations and give yourself some reasonable cause for success, and also make it easier on the regulatory people to permit something than if you just focus on, you know, just one particular area. So if you say up in the bends and some other location, whatever, I think if you give them that flexibility, things seem to get permitted easier.
Thank you, Dave. Board members, Mr. Brace, did I see a hand up?
No,
No. Any other questions from the board?
No, that was
Comments?
me. That was me waving my hands. I'm sorry.
Oh, who's the Ginger?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Mr. McKenna for his knowledge on the general way dredging happens, and I was really interested to find that he thinks there's more funding for research, and I think that whatever we turn up or don't turn up, that research is definitely in order. So I thought that was very interesting. I took a look at my father's Fishing Around Nantucket book, and he noted that all the eelgrass died on the East Coast pretty much, including Nantucket, in 1931 due to, I think at the time it was considered to be some kind of a virus. And he said that actually the scallops were able to attach to algae on the bottom or some of the shells that were down there, and that one thing that happened was that the scallops grew bigger because of better water circulation, in his opinion, and the result was that they were easier to catch without all the eelgrass, and so the season sometimes they would have pretty much caught everything they could catch by the end of November. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway, I'm always interested to hear what everybody says. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ginger. I guess, I mean, there's certainly a lot of science to it. As Mr. Franzuto was mentioning sizing, how large of an area, 100 square feet, 100 square yards, we'd have to take into consideration the movement of the sediment. If we were only to do a small area, 100 by 100, will it fill in by the rest of the sand around it? So, a study on how that would work and the flow of the sand in the area. I'm thinking like Second Bend is probably the bend in the harbor that has the least amount of flow, with Second Point coming around and just about closing up the whole bend. But I'm not sure of, the lack of eelgrass in that bend or not. Haven't been in there in quite some time. It was always a heavily grassed bend that supported usually very small scallops, always on account of it having poor circulation in there, but also considered a good seed bed and a safe haven for scallops, because very seldom do you see them wash up on the beach in Second Bend. So obviously a lot of research would have to go into it, but as the Natural Resources Director has mentioned in the past, there's no silver bullet. We were talking about the Lingbia earlier, questions are being asked, what's this coming from? There's no one source, there's many sources, and trying to create healthier eelgrass beds. To me, this is just something we can add to, I'm hoping, to our arsenal of keeping a healthy harbor. Simply just from noticing how much sand has poured into the harbor over the years. And you can see it through the erosion, whether it's at UMass Field Station, the bluff at Pockama Point, how many houses have been moved back due to erosion inside the harbor. The bulkhead in front of the condos on Washington Street, you used to be able to walk out in front of them. Even at low tide, you can't get out in front of that bulkhead anymore. Where's all the sand gone? It's in the harbor. It's certainly not too much of it could be washing out of the harbor. So as I've said before, the way the sand moves on our eastern and southern shores can't be the same inside the harbor. So I think a lot of slumping has gone on. Mr. McKenna, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us and giving us more than a glimmer of hope of something to move forward and create a plan of action with.
Yeah, well, good luck with it. We're a resource. Feel free to reach out to us again. My one thought too is I'd really try to bring in other partners, including, the DMFs of the world and all the fisheries folks that might involve, but the more, partners helps you gain momentum. And when you come forward, if they're part of your team, the Phil Colarusos of eelgrass and all that, it just makes for a stronger project.
Thank you. Board members, anything else to add before we close on this subject for tonight.
Thanks.
Tara,
All right, good luck, guys.
thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Moving forward to Health of Harbors, excessive lawn fertilizer use. Anybody got any new ideas to talk people into planting clover? We'll keep this on here until we make a difference somehow. FDA shellfish taking prohibition in mooring fields. Do we have any new news with this? Mr.
I don't have
Francisco?
any
Oh.
new updates.
All right,
You know, I should have mentioned this before Steve, Steve and I talked about this earlier today. And he had heard some grumblings about DMF and the FDA and everything, but he wasn't aware of the restrictive nature that that we were briefed on. So he's gonna follow up on that. And I'll be talking to him the rest before the end of the week, but he was not aware that this had taken on a life of its own, where they were closing areas to shellfish based on mooring activity. He did share with me a project in, I can't remember where it was now. I want to say Falmouth, that a man wanted to expand a marina, and this subject came up, and he had to condition the permit that they would not allow any people to stay on the boats overnight, and he had to put in a second pump out station. So this is gaining traction throughout the state. And I don't know why it's become such an issue, but he also shared that if we can gather a strong enough case with the pump out data and stuff like that, the majority of those boats out there don't have heads and don't have holding tanks and don't use heads and don't discharge. So, yeah, you have a lot of moorings, but so does Falmouth and so does Chatham and so does everybody else. So anyway, he was going to kind of follow up with his DMF people and try to find out what was really going on with this.
That's great.
just to, as an example, Tara had mentioned at a previous meeting that they wanted to see, down to 20 boats or less in a certain anchorage area. And I was looking at the area between Brant Point and Jetties Beach just the other day, and I noticed probably, I think it was last Thursday, there were still 42 boats anchored or moored in that Hulbert Avenue area. And when you look at things in numbers, I thought to myself, wow, that's still a lot of boats to be moored out there. And if every boat is considered a source of pollution in some way, shape, or form, they need some numbers to substantiate their reasoning. And so, in looking at it that way, I understood it better.
Well, those boats are in a shellfish area, so they're supposed to be out by October 15th. But you look at the aerial photography for that area in the summer, and you're never going to dig another cohog there based on their criteria.
Yeah.
So again, the harbor plan has it broken down by number of boats per area. It's literally broken down by area of how many boats are permitted in that area. But again, you also have to remember that 90% of these boats are not polluting. They don't have the ability to pollute unless somebody he's over the side. But I mean, it's just, I'm just saying that they're not going, they don't have a holding tank and they don't have a head. They may have a porta potty that goes ashore with them. But to apply that type of criteria, I just don't know where they're coming from with this. Not every boat is a polluter. Not every boat is a mega yacht. Not every boat has a direct discharge overboard. So I don't know where they're coming from.
Bottom paint.
I'm sorry.
Every boat has bottom paint.
Well, bottom paint, there's a bylaw in Nantucket of the certain type of bottom paint that is allowed and not allowed. So yeah, I mean, I'll agree that that's probably a minimal source of some type of pollution, but they're talking about, I mean, for you to close an area based on fecal coliform counts, that's a pretty high bar to set.
Yeah.
And if you're doing your pump outs and you know, you're monitoring the birds and you're doing your water quality testing, and like Tara said, now they're able to differentiate between bird and human. That's a pretty high bar to set to close an area just based on the number of boats.
Understood. And most of the boats in that area, Halbert Avenue, are daytime boats.
Yeah.
I'd say 90% of them. But
Andy, I have something to add to that real quick.
yes,
We have been working with Sheila and Christy Baker and have received information on the amount of moorings and the amount of boats that have heads. I think it's like less than 25 boats in the entire mooring field that have heads. And, you know, it doesn't bother me when they close an area because of fecal coliforms, because that is a real risk, but they close these areas because of the potential risk without having any information on the types of boats that we have in the area. And so we're building our case and letting them know exactly what we're doing. And in the meantime, they need to come up with a reasonable buffer and figure out what they're going to call one area, because all the way from Holbert Ave to the mooring field, we'll never get below 20 boats. That's ridiculous. So it's something that they haven't finalized yet. I think they're very much in development with it, and they just wanted to go ahead and institute it to let people know that it's coming down the pipeline. But I think we have a real chance here to kind of present them with how we want things to go and what we think is reasonable for these areas to keep them open for shellfish. And so that's something that we're working on.
wow, that's
Yeah, the potential.
more data and recording.
No,
for
but
you.
the potential for polluting. I mean, that's like saying let's close the shellfish beds because we might have an oil spill that goes in a storm drain off of Holbert Avenue or off the boat basin. I mean, you talking about frustration. That's a major league. You know, the potential. Yeah, the potential is there, but not if you know, you've heard me say it before, but we've had a federal no discharge zone since 1993, the second one in the country. We've been heralded by the EPA of pumping more sewage than any other community on the East Coast. And you want to close a mooring field because you might have some poop? That would have been a good story in 1990.
Yeah,
I'll be quiet. Thank you.
No, that's good, Dave. Thanks for sharing. Otherwise, that would have just been a very blank section right there in the recording. Good stuff, Dave. Board members, anything else to add?
Oh, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Ginger, please.
Yeah, I was, I'm interested, I'm really glad that we're separating the bird and fecal coliform and the human, because, you know, it's always been convenient to point the fingers at the geese, you know, but, you know, you sort of look at the goose population in the harbor in the summer is what, maybe 100 or so, and meanwhile, you've got, you know, 40,000 people added to the septic system. So you kind of have to wonder where everything is coming from. And I mean, it's certainly true that the cormorants are a new, relatively new development, and there's no denying that they're breeding over on the beach on Cotu, and they do stink, and it pretty much kills everything underneath for a year or two. But then the nitrogen increases the beach vegetation. Grows much more lush as a result afterwards. So you can't just look at one part of the cycle, but certainly we need to know what the impact of the birds is on the harbor, because of course I think they're migratory and therefore protected. So if there's going to be any kind of anti-bird action, it has to be that has to be permitted too. So I really think that's a good thing to do, is to monitor whose coliforms are being defecated.
Thank you, Ginger.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Pront,
they are federally protected. I've looked into it.
they are.
I should have known.
You can't shoot them legally.
Thank you, Dan. All right. Well, I would like to reiterate what Ginger just said, being able to, for natural resources, for our town biologists to be able to somehow separate, between natural occurring fecal coliform and man-made. That's a huge step. Those are numbers that I imagine in our future will be helping out tremendously with the way decision making works. Anybody else? Not seeing or hearing any. Water quality testing update, boat holding tank, dye tab distribution. Did you have anything on water quality testing, Tara? Did you already share that with us in an earlier report?
I don't have anything. The earlier report was that we had completed our harbor testing the last time I spoke with you, and the reports are being assembled. And then the only other testing we have will be prior to the opening of the 2 great ponds and when they close as well.
Thank you. Board members, anything to add on this subject? New business. The Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board's general advisory protocol, something Mr. Brace and I were talking about when we created the agenda the other day. Just basically, I believe we were talking about keeping a better general practice and line of communication with the select board or any other board or commission or department of what we're discussing, what's on our table, directions that we're moving in, if any, so that we can be a part of any discussion that's related, and also keeping the select board up to date on what our current discussions are. Is that pretty much what we were talking about, Mr. Brace?
Yes.
Okay, anything you want to add to that? Simply, it's up to us in creating a delivery process, I guess, and keeping a line of communication open.
I guess I brought it up because because of how much they listen to me at Ted Lambrick's, the last continuation of Ted Lambrick's public hearing, and it seemed to sway the vote a bit, although maybe whatever. But it got me thinking that if we talk to the select board on a regular basis, either by emailed letter or being at the public comment section of their select board meetings when it was the right time to do it, then we would be greasing the way for ourselves when we actually came forward with changes. At least they would know. They'd, you know.
Well,
Because
and
if we're not talking about it and saying that we want to change this or do this or whatever, then they're going to think that everything's fine if they don't hear from us. When, as we know from these meetings, you know, we talk about all kinds of things that we are working long-term on solutions for. So if we, you know, come up with them, you know, hearing from Tom that we didn't get any sort of acknowledgement that we were the drivers behind the liveaboard regulations, that would have been a situation where we could have gone to a select board meeting and say, hey, we're working on this. We're going to advise Sheila and she's going to bring this to you guys, but we're working on this.
Mr. Franzuko. Oh.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
Peter.
No, I'm done.
All right. Dave?
Peter, didn't you used to cover the SHAB meetings as a reporter?
Yeah.
Is there any hope of rekindling something like that?
Well, they'll send somebody when they hear something. Like Brian Bouchard has been to our meetings over the last couple of months. Every time something shows up, they see the agenda and they go, huh, and they come. But I think our time slot competes with school committee. And so a reporter goes to school committee over going to this board. And I just happened to be a reporter who had more than a passing interest in this world. And almost every meeting I go to, I come away with a story. And the more I got into it, the more I get involved, the more I understood the harbor. And my editors were more than happy to have me write stories about what SHAB was doing and what was going on in the harbor. So I made a point of going all the time. So it's whatever they want to do. So if we could also reach out to the paper and say, hey, we're going to be talking about this. Will you guys come to the meeting? Could be more proactive in that way.
Well, just from my observation, if the newspaper's going to get involved, it's got to be a hot topic with substance. Another example, I mean, first of all, not getting recognition, to me, that's not the end of the world. We know we were involved. And I think as far as your attendance at the hearing for Mr. Lambrecht, if it wasn't for you adding in what you did at that meeting, Mr. Brace, then personally, the select board was making a decision without all the information. And so they were basically voting ill-informed. And I'm wondering if it would be maybe more effective if each select board member be on the mailing list of our minutes. Send them our minutes. And because I was thinking, first of all, okay, Peter, should we do a monthly report to the select board? But that's just simply compiling more for you to do as a volunteer secretary. Let's just send them our minutes and see if it's their choice whether they read them or not, but they'll be up to date. You're very good with having the minutes, being on top of them. And I would say, once you've sent the draft to us, you could send it to them as well, or we could wait until we've approved the minutes before sending it to them. But I mean, one other example of kind of you know, hearing that they want to hear from us, they being the select board, and thinking back to, you know, just recently, Matt Fee approached you, Mr. Brace, and myself about the claims made by Mr. Bender and what could be happening with some yachts and in the boat basin and whatnot. And then somebody either on the board, I believe that it was possibly the chair, one of the board members said to Mr. Fee, well, gee, if this was an issue, how come we haven't heard from Shab on this? Well, and here we are, this has been in a meeting. Mr. Bender came to a meeting, it was several years ago, you know, made the same claims. We asked him to come back with some substance. He kind of just threw up his hands at that. And we can't take action on something that has no substance behind it. But you know, at least the select board, if we sent our minutes to them, they'd be aware that it was part of our meetings. We spoke about this actually more than one meeting. Mr. Bender may have only come to one meeting, but I believe we've spoken about it at quite a few meetings. And Mr. Sidlowski.
I want to push back a little bit on the idea of sending them our minutes. They get a lot of paper to look at. And if they start getting our minutes, they'll look at, they're not going to study it. They're not going to look for things. They're going to see they look a lot alike every meeting. They're just not going to read it. I think we have to find a way to decide when a topic needs to go to them so they know what we're working on. This liveaboard thing is a good example. We did this liveaboard thing, and then we took it to Sheila, and we really were advisory committee for the select board. We really should have taken it to select board and said to the select board, we really want to move on this liveaboard thing. And we've been having meetings, and we had not a public hearing, but we had a lot of times when people came to talk about it. And I think if we get to an issue where something might happen, just like we're talking about this stuff in the harbor, to send a message to them that says, okay, we have now been talking to natural resources about this. This is a big issue to us. We're spending a lot of time on it. We're trying to figure this out. We just want you to know that we're working on eelgrass issues and excessive sand issues in the harbor. It's a focus of ours. But just to send them stuff without saying, well, you got to look at this part of it, I think it's just going to get lost in the water.
Tom, you make total sense. I appreciate that. Mr. Franzuto.
Yeah, Tom's exactly right. I think we agreed a few meetings ago that we didn't do that correctly. And I think that Tom's exactly right. I think that if we have an issue, we're an advisory board to them. And if it's going to be, and I don't want to bracket it by saying it's going to require some action by them, like the mooring regulations or by the town pier slip thing or whatever. But I think we just we need to remember that we advise them, and if we've got something, you know, bubbling along, then we need to advise them that we're working on that. I think we just did that incorrectly. I think we were trying to be, I don't know, maybe we were trying to be too polite, but we should have. We spent a lot of time, like the Lambrecht thing. We should have sent them a memo or an email or something saying, hey, you know, along with the Natural Resources Department, we're working on this, and we're riding them. We're riding herd on this. You know, I just think that's what we ought to do in the future, and not advise Carlson. Don't advise Lucy. Advise the board of what we're working on. I think Tom's spot on, and I also agree with him about the minutes. They're going to look at that and they're going to go,
yeah,
right.
I'm not reading 2 pages.
Right. Mr. Brace.
Mr. Chairman. Oh, sorry.
I agree with Tom and I agree with Dave, but on Dave's point, I definitely agree. We advise the select board, but also you run the risk of the select board sending us to work with Sheila or work with Jeff. You know, that's going to come. You know, we're just going to tell them, hey, we're working on this, and we want to propose this eventually, and we'll have to work with our department heads anyway. But I just think it's important that they know that we came up with this idea and we're working on this. And we may even say, you know, here's what we're doing. We're going to work with Sheila on this. So when you hear
Right.
something from Sheila,
Right.
you know, just so that they know that, you know, I know it's a bit of one-upmanship, a little bit, or a little bit of pride there, but just so that they know that we're a resource that they can tap into if they need to ask questions when it comes time for us to have this thing in front of them. They'll know that, hey, Shab told us that they were planning on working on this. And
Right. But you know, we would CC Carlson, we would CC Sheila on what we're saying to them. And of course, we're going to work with them because that's how you get that's how you get it done. That's how you implement it. But we shouldn't be shy in telling them what we're working on. And of course, there'd be a sentence in there that, you know, we're coordinating this effort with the harbor master or the natural resources person. But yeah, I don't think we should be shy in informing them.
Oh, okay, so after listening, you know, I understand that the minutes are a little much. Our agenda says what we're working on. I mean, they, like tonight with Mr. McKenna, you know, how soon do we let the select board know? I mean, it's like a dredging plan has been on Mr. Carlson's desk for quite some time. Coastal resiliency has taken a plan, or it's not a plan, but suggestions. A lot of the suggestions have to do with mining sand offshore or out of the Carter Bay, and I'm thinking, you know, teaming projects together. We've been talking about, you know, the dredging portion of things for about a year now, and you know, do they even know it, and what we're, you know, trying to close in on, so to speak. So how do we, what's our best approach, simplest but most effective in simply letting them know what's on our desk, what we're working on? Mr. Bossy.
Yep, I agree with everybody else. I think we just need to come up with a format for an update from Shab, basically a Shab update, because we have right now two things that we've been discussing heavily. We've got the vacuuming the bay bottom, and we've got the 20 boats in the mooring, right? With no heads. We're not doing all the footwork on and all the groundwork on these, but we've been discussing these for a while. We're exploring it, and we're going to get involved in them. You know, I assume more likely the dredging we'll spend more time on, but I think we've had not enough discussions about these mooring issues with closures. And I just think we just need to come up with a format that just we can issue an email to the board or a letter to the select board saying, look, it's an update from us, Harbor Shellfish. Here's just a couple topics we're actively working on. If you have any questions, we just want to let you know this is what we're up to.
Mr.
Ginger.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ginger.
I think a brief note. I think I certainly agreed with Tom. I mean, the agendas are publicly available. Anybody who's interested can look at them. But I think just a brief occasional update saying these are two things that have been discussed with and you know, with the Concom and the you know, we're just an advisory board, and that, you know, that these are things that are on our radar without taking up a lot of time or asking for some action prematurely, just to let them know that we exist. It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, Mr. Brace?
And by doing that, an update, as Ginger says, we are focusing the select board on what we're working on in a shorter format than having them go through the minutes. And then we can, when we send the update, we can send the relevant minutes with that update so they can see how we built our discussion up to that point where we, so they can have the background.
Mr. Franzuto?
And also, to hedge our bets a little bit, the last paragraph should be, and if you have concerns, or if the public has raised concerns to you about certain issues, please direct them to the Harbor Shellfish Advisory. And we'd be more than happy to help them. I'm sure Peter can word it far better than I, but certainly open the door, leave the door open, that, so then when someone like, and I'm using this as an example, but someone like Matt Fee gets, accosted by somebody like Steve Bender, Matt Fee's got a glib, and I'm not putting words in his mouth. He can speak for himself. But if someone out of the blue comes up to Dawn Holgate and says, "What's this they're going to close Scallops about because they're poop in the harbor?" she can say, "Hey, you know what? One, Shab's working on that, and two, go talk to Shab, because that's the avenue to get the information." I think it's a great idea, and I would suggest, I don't know what I would suggest as far as timing. Should it be quarterly? I don't know. That's something we need to talk about, but probably not monthly. But what's the board's idea on how frequently we should do this?
Well, maybe we start with an as-needed basis, or as we feel necessary basis. I was going to say, before you put the nix on it, I was just going to say simply monthly. This is our second meeting of the month. After our second meeting of the month, Mr. Brace sends a memo to the select board of the topics on our current agenda, and just so they're in the know. It's as simple as that. We want them to be in the know, because we're hearing things as if they're not in the know of what we're talking about here, and for a town to work in unison, so to speak, I think it only makes sense that they are. Mr. Sidlowski?
Aside from our wanting to tell them if something just comes up, I think it might be helpful for Peter to ask Erica what frequency might make sense for them, because I think she would know from working with them just how often we should communicate with them. I don't know if that makes any sense. Monthly sounds like a lot, with things that are once they get a message, things don't move that fast. So monthly seems, my gut says it's a little frequent, but I do think that Erica would know better as to what, and also what other committees are doing, how they're aware of other boards that are happening, because we're sort of in the dark about it.
Mr. Franzuto?
That's a good point. They have, the reason I didn't say monthly was because in the summer we only meet once a month, and some of these things take a little bit of time to gain some traction, and you don't want to miss a report or not have a report because something's not reportable yet, if you will. But they have something called, and this is for Peter's benefit, they have something called a reading file. The selectmen have what's, if I remember correctly, it's called a reading file. And I remember numerous times of being in that office, giving them something, and it would go in this reading file. So I think it's kind of a depository, if you will, for just this type of thing. So Peter, maybe that's, how often and how do you get it in the reading file?
What do you think, Peter? You want to, I mean, you know what we're trying to achieve here. You want to get in touch with Erica and find out the methodology of it? That's
Sure.
best.
Yep.
All right, great.
And Tara just texted me or through the chat. She said she has to go
Okay.
and that she says we need a Facebook page for posting agendas and hot topics, but I have I created a Facebook page. We've just never done anything with it.
Oh,
I mean, do you want us to, I could put the agendas up on Facebook if you want me to. I just don't know if we want to be posting. I don't know. I would have to ask Erica about that.
Mr. Bossy.
The whole Lambert thing, yes, this is all public information, but that's not something I want to be sticking on Facebook. Our discussions about that, they're public, as I say, but I wouldn't be posting them on Facebook. I think our plan right now is a good plan to check and see what they believe, but I think probably quarterly feels kind of good, unless there's we're coming to the end of something, as with the Liveaboards, where it might have had to be a little more frequent right at the end because something was happening with it. They had a decision to make, but I think we're on a good track with this. I really do.
All right, quarterly and/or an as-needed basis. I think we need an as-needed section in there for something that just pops up that they need to be aware of. Did Tara leave already?
Yes.
All right. Well, I just want to publicly thank Tara for her devotion to not just tonight's meeting, but every meeting that she attends. She's a wealth of information for us, and her devotion of time is very much needed and appreciated here. So thank you very much to Tara. Anything else on our general advisory protocol? All right. So Peter, you'll talk with Erica about an approach.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. And if you're busy, let me know. I can have a talk with her as well, but then I'll be relaying that secondhand to you if it goes that way. But I'm glad to reach out to Erica anytime.
Okay.
We go way back. So Coastal Resilience Advisory Board update, Mr. Brace.
The only thing I have to update you on is that the release of the draft, the release of the final report has been pushed forward to October 26th.
And even though they've said, suggestions, comments needed to be in by, gosh, it was like Labor Day or Columbus Day. I mean, what everything that's coming out is all suggestions. I imagine there's still going to be a lot more discussion in the future
Right.
on directions to go and time to be able to get involved and throw in opinions. Am I wrong by saying that, Mr. Brace?
Well, yes and no. I mean, they're just trying to get the plan. I guess they've gotten a lot of feedback on the draft, so they want to incorporate that as needed, so that on the 26th they'll be able to say, this is the plan. This is what we're recommending, and then we go from there on that. They want to make sure that everyone that had something to say that needs to be in the plan is in the plan, knowing that as we go down the road toward, you know, acting on the 40 some odd recommendations that are in the plan, or not acting, at least we look back and this is the plan that we did. And this is our basis. This is our jumping off point. Yes, it's all recommendations. It's not, nothing is a regulation. Nothing is being decided. It's what the committee, having informed the consultant Arcadis, and all the public input that has come along and all the research that they've looked at, you know, all of that has informed the creation of the plan, which is the basis for us going forward, you know, as sea level rise impacts us. Does that make sense?
All right, I don't want to pick apart the plan here tonight at all. I just, you know, there's a lot to look at there, and which direction it goes. I mean, we as a board, you know, Peter, you're there as a member of our board, but we as a board actually didn't, I don't believe we really came out with any suggestions or opinions. And when I see, you know, the plan, the picture that was put in the paper of like this thing that gets, you know, it's just a suggestion to go from the creeks around to Brant Point to save the town, so to speak, from tide rising. I just think to myself, here we are trying to figure out about taking sand out of our harbor and to build this big dike-like thing across the harbor. How many millions of yards of sand does it take to do that? And I always thought, you know, that because also part of the plan talks about stabilizing low areas on Cotu and on the eastern shore. So I always kind of felt, well, if we were going to build some type of a dike or a lock type of thing to save our harbor, you think it would simply go from Brant Point to First Point, and then we deal with everything else on hard ground, raise up whatever infrastructure or you know, bulkheads or whatever on hard ground, not to add this what appears to be about a half-mile long thing in the harbor that actually helps create more marina area that they drew in. I had to kind of laugh at that, but it is just a report of suggestions, and I appreciate all the time and energy put into it by these people. But I just hope there's time for more input in the future here to really knock out some logistics. Peter.
Mr. Chairman?
Sorry, Ginger, I'll get to you next.
With respect, Mr. Chairman, you're starting to pick apart the plan, and that the wall that you're talking about is a long-term, 40 years out recommendation. It hasn't even anywhere near come close to being something that is going to happen. It's just an idea. It's Facebook fodder. It's, you know, this is what they think when things get extreme that the town might look at. So, you know, I'm gonna sound this horn a lot in the future. None of these things are anything at all until, you know, it gets voted on town meeting and it's been studied and worked through, and we're going to drive ourselves nuts if we try and pick apart the plan and discuss things that we all think are, that's the craziest damn thing I've ever seen. I don't want to do that. That sucks. This sucks. None of this is written in stone at all. It's just in a plan, and it's a resource for us. And here are some ideas that you guys on Nantucket might be able to use. So it's not worth getting all keyed up about yet.
Gotcha. I understand, Peter. Thank you for that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ginger.
Through you, just a quick question. Peter, did Arcadis do any original research or have any ideas where they would like more research done.
I don't, not sure what you're asking me.
Well, they've looked at a lot of research, and a lot of research has been done. And I have not had a chance to work through it all. I'm still, I've just had my second cataract, eye operation. So I've had a long time where I had a very hard time reading. So I haven't looked at it. I was just wondering what, Arcadis's recommendations. They've looked at everything that exists. It sounded pretty comprehensive, but I wondered if they had identified any areas that they wanted more research done, or if they did any original research themselves.
Well, it wasn't there, through you, Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
Ginger, it wasn't their job to do any research. It was their job to take what existed and what the committee told them and what the public told them, and then come up with their recommendations. I haven't read the thing all the way through, but I know there are areas where they say that, these things will require more work, more study, more whatever.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Franzuto.
If you're wondering why I'm being quiet on this, it's because Peter spent an hour and a half talking me off the ledge earlier today, so.
Okay. All right, good. Well, there's certainly plenty of topics. Is there anything more from the board on coastal resilience? Okay. Public questions, comments, tonight's meeting? Anybody in the public have something to add? Recap items for next meeting. The only thing I'm going to mention on this is citizen articles have to be in by November 15th, which isn't too far off. I've had a lot of pressure from people wondering concerned about stormwater runoff from private property and development. And I've actually had some people send me some regulations that other towns have. They're quite extensive regulations that some other towns in Massachusetts have about, raising your grade, shedding stormwater runoff onto neighboring properties. I think, even as far away as, mid-island, you still end up with runoff in the harbor from development in some way, shape, or form. If anybody, any board members, are interested in something like this, I may be working on some type of an article for stormwater runoff. I went to the health department to see if they were doing something about pools and how they're pumped out. It's very possible the health department is working on something like that. The health department nor Conservation Commission wants anything to do with stormwater runoff. Conservation, Concom covers it within 100 feet of a wetland, but that's all. Excuse me. The Plus Department, the Building Department, they don't seem to want to address stormwater runoff. And the more infill that takes place with development, the more problems we have, especially with houses being built without any type of stormwater mitigation at all. I'm seeing big spec houses going in without gutters, downspouts, definitely no dry wells. It's only exacerbating a problem. But I'm up for any input from board members. If you want to give me a call separately, talk about any issues like this. The deadline's closing in on citizen articles. I always wonder if there's something, the board would inspire as an article, or at least support in a way. just some thoughts, for some homework. If there's nothing else, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman. This is Ginger.
We have a second.
I'll second it, Stan.
All right, Ginger is motion to adjourn tonight's meeting. Mr. Pronk has seconded the motion. All in favor, Mr. Brace,
Aye.
Mr. Sadowski,
Aye.
Mr. Bossy,
Aye.
Mr. Franzuto.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Our meeting is
night.
adjourned. Good night.
Good night,
Good night.
everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.